Hey everyone, welcome to episode 1 of the Brainstorms podcast. This week I have my longtime friend Wes Merrill joining me, and we get into some really great ideas. So to give you the quick summary, here's what we talk about. We talk about buying businesses for entrepreneurs and turning that into sort of the new age accelerator model. We talk about student loan repayment platforms for corporations, helping facilitate those payments between employers and employees. We really dive deep into that one. And then we also talk about Substack for texting, which could be the new wave for digital creators looking to engage with their audience. I'm really excited to jump into this one. Stay tuned, and we'll talk about all three. All right, I think we're recording, and let's jump into it. Maybe just to kick off, the sort of genesis of this is I had mentioned in my newsletter at some point, I think it was when I was first starting it, that the reason why I was writing Brainstorms was because it was just sort of me and my friends BSing about ideas all the time. And part of the fun of it was finding out which ideas were good, which ones were bad, and, polishing those ideas up a little bit. So what I want to do is take it back, sort of regress and just go back to these sort of BS sessions and just record them. Because I think we have good ideas. Wes has good ideas. And just see what comes of it, right? So these are going to be a little bit more half-baked than what are in the actual newsletter, but some real nuggets can come out of this, and I figured might as well capture it and share it with everybody.
Cool.
Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, why the podcast though?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. I think that some people prefer audio over just written. I know that for me, if I'm in the car or something and I just need something to listen to, it's just easier, right? I don't have time to read a whole thing.
Sure.
And I think that you get a different vibe, from just talking about ideas, than you do from the more formal, written word. So,
Yeah, I mean, it feels a bit more warm. Like newsletters sometimes feel a little bit more cold. So,
yeah,
I think having a different kind of warmer format is always a good thing, though, too. So,
I think it does good things for your brand too. I think that for me, I do boot camps and stuff, and that's mostly driven by me talking and not necessarily my personality, but things that I don't cover in the newsletter, and you wouldn't know that, right, by just reading what I talk about, because it's not about me in the newsletter. It's more about the ideas. And I want to keep this about the ideas, but I think that we both have interesting, analysis to give. So anyway, what I want to do first and foremost is introduce Wes. I think this is going to be you're going to be a recurring guest, so it's important that everybody knows you.
So special.
I know. You'll be the friend of the podcast. So Wes is one of my oldest friends. We went through Startup Accelerator in 2016, but even before that, we lived together in college. And he's one of the he's one of the main people that I would do sort of these brainstorm sessions with, and we talk almost daily. Just about business stuff in general. But I want you to sort of tee yourself up. He's a super dude, and he's going to have a lot of really interesting ideas. But I know that intro probably didn't do you justice.
In any intro that you'll ever give me will never do me enough justice.
I know.
I'll give it a whirl. So like Kevin said, back from college, we kind of met. And I guess he was kind of the catalyst as to where I've kind of gotten today. Was we met in maybe 2012, 2013, 2011, somewhere around in there. And I ended up, through my years at college, I switched my major 4 times. And after the 4th or 5th time, Kevin was like, maybe you should try business things. And so right. He kind of opened my eyes up into more of startups and entrepreneurship, and then it's been a doozy thereafter. And we've eaten, this might sound a little graphic, but Kevin and I have eaten a lot of shit together. Yep. We've done a lot of different ventures and gone through a lot of heartache and a lot of trouble, but along with those, I think we've ridden some really high highs together too. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like Kevin said, I think we're kind of each other's behind the scenes right hand man behind any of these things that we kind of want to go out and start or talk about or think through. We're chatting constantly about this, if it's in Slack or hopping on a call, or
Yep.
we've even taken trips to go hash out some of our more fun ideas that we want to work on together. But that's a little bit about me. So I work, I'm a full-time designer, UI UX designer. I work for an insurance company. So really passionate about product design and startups, and kind of just how does that mesh in with each other. And Kevin and I have worked on, our last newsletter was called Product Bite. So, I don't know if I don't know if you've talked about that in public or anything else like that, and we could save that for another time. But I think it's kind of like the 50-foot overview for me.
Yep.
Nothing, I wouldn't say, extremely or overtly brag worthy, other than just saying I have failed an extreme amount, which is a blessing and a curse for sure.
Right.
But went through an accelerator together, those sort of things. But I'm really thankful, excited to be here, and really excited to see where this goes. I know that you and I bullshit a lot, and so actually bringing this out and being able to do it and have a reason to do it feels really fun too.
No, I agree. I want to keep this sort of going and make it a recurring thing. Cool. Okay. So, yeah, and as we go, we're going to keep on giving sort of like tidbits of our background. I think it'll just come out organically.
Yeah.
But I think this is a good foundation. So, with that, let's jump in. Do you want me to do the first one, or do you want to pick the first one? I'm open to either.
What's the agenda for today?
Yeah. So basically what we're going to do is we keep this running doc of like ideas, and we're just going to sort of like pick out the ones that we want to talk about, and do a little like on the spot deep dive on the ideas, what we like, what we don't like. And we've got a few picked out right now that we're going to sort of run through. And that's going to be the gist of the podcast. It's just going to be like our quick hot takes on, fun ideas that we think could exist or should exist.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, if you want to go ahead and try to tackle that first idea or bring it out, let's get into it.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. First one on my list. I'm a huge fan of sort of the people that I've been meeting. And so let me preface it with this. I've been meeting a lot of people through Twitter, and my Twitter game is not super strong right now, but it's something I'm actively working on. And really interesting conversations happen there, and it's like the place for entrepreneurs. It feels like the social media for entrepreneurs right now. So I saw this thing put out by Sean Purry. He also runs the My First Million podcast. Huge fan. Go check that out. But he put out this tweet that was super interesting, and it kind of got me thinking. So the context here is he was like, hey, we're going to sell this, like, I'm going to buy a business from like Micro Acquire or one of these sort of marketplaces where you can buy like these small niche.
Like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like SaaS companies.
Okay.
Yep. So it was an internet company. It wasn't like a small business or, like a brick and mortar thing. And he's like, I'm going to buy this. My plan is to do it for $5,000. And then I'm going to hire an operator and help them grow it for X period of time. Right. And this was sort of like a social experiment that he was going to do it in public. And I found out later, because he talked about it, that he actually teamed up with a dude who runs Micro Acquire. His name's Andrew something. And Andrew was the genesis for this idea. He DM'd Sean and was like, hey, you should do this. So it's kind of a win-win for both of them. Andrew from Micro Acquire gets exposure because he's like, we can have like a success story.
Tons and tons of brand awareness. I mean,
100%.
Since it's so novel. I mean, other places are going to pick that up too, that type of content.
Exactly. And like the undercurrent of all of this is like, it's all going to be built in public. So now you're going to build a following both for like your personal brand as well as the company's brand. And Sean just sort of gets to like hitch his horse to that wagon because he's the one who has the following and is going to like spread the word. Right. So it's a no brainer for him as well. Like, oh yeah, sure. If you're going to help like do this. So anyway, Sean puts out this tweet that's like, hey, I'm going to do this thing. It starts out as like a $5,000 sort of like bankroll, like this is what we're going to spend. And through the course of other people wanting to invest and Andrew jumping in and saying like, I'll match funds, I think it gets up to like $50,000.
So it's not just like, hey, this is our max limit of $5,000. They're actually being like, let's raise a pool to buy a business. Is that correct?
And I'm not sure how the like financing works.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, what's the legality behind that? Even like, do you
Yeah,
have to be accredited or anything? I guess I don't know.
I have no idea, and I don't know if they're taking like an equity stake in it or if they're truly doing it for like the sake of like science of like let's just see what happens, which
An
seems like
exposure.
right. I don't know. Like I wouldn't do that personally. Like I would be like, no, I want a piece of this, but I don't know. They were sort of cryptic when they were talking about it in the sense of uh, what the motivation is for other people to join in.
It's
Point being, though,
ironic
yeah,
being cryptic and building in public,
yeah,
but
it's sort of oxymoron. So anyway, they're at 50K, right? So this isn't the idea yet. This is what this got me thinking about. So
okay,
huge amounts of traction. I think it makes a ton of sense for everybody involved, right? They're buying a business that probably has a decent amount of traction and just needs a sort of like rock star operator to help get it to the next level. And this person, like I just said, they need to be a rock star. They probably don't even need to be a rock star. They just need to be motivated because they, as in Sean and Andrew and the other people who are investing in this, have sort
provide
of
like
like
coaching and jump like
exactly.
that, right? Got it.
So to me, this sounds a lot like an accelerator, like a startup accelerator, right?
Oh, so it's almost for the person who's running it of just being like, I don't have to necessarily take the
Right.
huge risk out on my own, and I get a mentor out of it. That's kind of dope.
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways, that makes sense for everybody involved. And the
Mm.
reason why my head immediately went to this is because, like, we both went through an accelerator, and I'm pretty deep in that space. But the
Yeah,
biggest problem with a lot of accelerators, if you're not YC, Techstars, 500, like these household names, if you're, not in like the top 10, you sort of like people that come to your accelerator, they don't necessarily have the best ideas or have the most amount of traction. Because if they did, they would just go to a bigger, more reputable accelerator. And also, these like more local accelerators are typically doing it with some sort of like an economic development play. So they're not necessarily shooting for $1 billion outcome because like it's
sure.
not realistic. But what they do want to do is have job creation, right? Like
Jobs, right?
exactly.
Jobs.
So like, oh, if we can like spur up and even get like 10 jobs as an outcome of this, that's a huge win. So they're funded in some cases by the government, and that's how they're structured. So to
Which,
me, go ahead.
I mean, I was just going to jump in there and say I think that's a really interesting play, like around the job creation, because you see these, like those programs out there where they're like, hey, move to our city, we'll pay you $10,000.
Exactly.
And it's like, this is probably a cheaper way of acquiring people for like from the city's point of view. It's a cheaper way of acquiring
Yep.
people to live in their city rather than doing like straight up cash to an individual too.
Right.
Interesting.
So I think that makes so much sense. And like maybe here's I've been a bit long-winded here, but here's the short version of why I think this makes sense. So if you look at the accelerator, let's say that you were to set this up with an accelerator model. They are basically hiring people. They're investing in companies that already have traction, which is the biggest problem with companies who apply is they just don't have the traction yet, right? They might be a cool person in the community, but they don't have the idea yet, and they're like, ugh, you're too early. I don't want to invest in you. So like early stage company like problem isn't a problem, right? So that's number one. The second thing is that as an operator, so like for me, let's say take me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this would be such a no-brainer for me. Like,
A
oh,
no-brainer.
I get a company that has traction and I just get to learn. It's like a little MBA school without having to go
Oh,
do all the shit,
absolutely.
right?
Or take out, funding for it or, money out of your own pocket or anything else like that. I mean,
Exactly. I just need to
yeah,
be able
it's
to follow the advice and execute and be like driven and into all of this, right? It has nothing to
mhm.
do with if like, I mean, there's a little bit that like the idea needs to still be solid and the company needs to be good. But I think it takes
Sure.
a ton of risk out on the front end. And then the
Do you,
output of that, I think, is going to be job creation, which is what they want. So that's why I think it makes total sense.
do you think like, and maybe this is, I'm just arbitrarily latching onto that number, but I mean, for normal accelerators that are wanting to go out, and I mean, they usually invest how much money into a company on average? Like 20K, 30K maybe?
It depends. Low end is like 25K, higher end is like 150K. So it's somewhere in
And
that range. Like, but 50K
okay,
seems like a pretty average amount.
okay. So for 50K, if they have a cohort of like 7 companies, What's the math on that? 350? Or
Yeah.
am I dumb?
Nope, 350.
Okay. Um, so what I'm wondering is from their perspective, is it invest 50K into seven different ideas, or invest 350K into like a well vetted business to buy, to bring into that ecosystem? I guess that's kind of what's going through my mind is, here's the underlying question: is 50K enough to buy a business that has like validated, proven traction? I guess that's what's. I mean, I don't want to latch onto the numbers, but I
Sure,
think
sure.
that's what's on my mind.
Well, I've perused like Micro Acquire and other sites, and it appears that you can get like a decent, like a company that has some traction for
Outside
50K.
of like e-commerce companies.
Outside of e-commerce, you can get like a SaaS business or like a content
Interesting.
business. Like you can get some of these sites or
Mm-hmm.
projects. But I think it would depend on what sort of like the motivation is of the accelerator. Is it about making a bunch of small bets, or do we just want to make one big bet and be like, or bigger bet, right? And buy a 350K business and then
Right.
see if we can scale it.
It's a bigger bet with less risk rather than
Exactly.
having let or yeah, you get it. Mm-hmm.
And I even have to believe that like, because the other part of like starting an accelerator is that you need to get a group of LPs who are just like the people who are going to put the money in, and the accelerator usually acts as like just the investment vehicle. They're kind of like the general partner who's like managing the fund.
Sure.
That model seems different enough that like accelerators are boring now. It's like we've seen them, right? There's the same shit over and over
Yeah.
again. This is like they operate
Right.
all in the cookie cutter way. Like even for the sake of just trying something new and being able to generate some excitement from like other LPs who've been burned maybe in the accelerator world or just not interested, this just feels
Mm-hmm.
like a
Or partnered
good.
with a bad accelerator. Right.
Right, exactly. It's like this is a differentiator that I don't see anybody doing this.
That's really interesting, man.
So I don't know. I think that it's an idea for people who maybe have some money to invest and want to like do more of a fund and like raise some money and try this sort of model. But it makes so much sense to me. Like if I had more money, I would say this is the way I would want to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, even if you take that out of like the traditional accelerator model, I mean, you could spin off that concept into a few different ways to do it, right? Like not necessarily the same concept as like a job board, but just being like, hey, I am Joe Schmo. I've got 350K, 500K, whatever the amount is to invest in a business. I don't want to run it, but I would like to buy a business, have someone else run it, almost like a matchmaking of doing
Right.
that for just people who have like a ton of excess cash to figure some of that stuff out too.
Yep.
It becomes like whoever's got all that money, like they're kind of like side project, side hustle, which I also think is an exciting thought rather than, them having to do the nights and weekends work for it.
Yeah, like it would be attractive to me as well as just like from any standpoint of it. Like if I was an investor, it feels like I'm hedging a little bit more. Like maybe I'm not gonna have $1 billion outcome with one of these. I don't know. Like they don't seem to be
Mm-hmm.
like unicorn status things because it's probably gonna come down to the executor more than anything else. But
Sure.
it does seem like a good way to just maybe 10x my money if I get like a small single.
Yeah. It's different than like the traditional, like, I'm not just saying like people, and I'm sure there's tons of people out there who are just like, I've just got 350K sitting around,
Right.
but it's a different way of investing the money rather than just putting it, shoving it in a mass mutual account or something else like that though too, which I think is
Yeah.
really interesting. I think it's a bit riskier than, maybe it's not, but maybe a bit riskier than the stock market. But I mean, you've got way more skin in the game to affect what your, like, hopefully what your monetary ROI, like your gain on what that would be.
Right.
So
Yeah, there's
yeah, it's
definitely
really
more
interesting.
upside. The last thing I'll say about this, and we can move on, is
Okay.
I think this follows. This is more of my like opinion here. I haven't really looked at stats, and it could be the byproduct of like where I'm hanging out on the internet and like the content I'm consuming. But lately, the last like year or two, it feels like the idea of buying a business has gotten way more popular, but it still hasn't hit like critical mass yet, right? Like I think we can all remember
Sure.
back in like 2010 or maybe even like 2012 when like entrepreneurship was like really taking off, and like everybody was like, I want to be an entrepreneur. This is when Gary Vee was like really pushing it, and it became
Crushing it.
like, yeah, the narrative of every 20 something was like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I'm going to do like whatever, you know? This to
Mm-hmm.
me feels like the early stages of the next wave of like, you don't actually need to start shit. You can just buy shit that works. And likely you're probably taking less risk doing that. There's a higher probability of success. You just need to have the capital on the front end to just finance it. And this works
Well,
not just with internet, but with any business.
what I think is really interesting about that too, where you're kind of talking about it's getting to be more attractive of
Right.
buying a business is like, especially right now, like let's just say there's not, the business that you want to buy or whatever for the next couple of years. Well, if you are finding a business to buy that's been maybe in operation for 5, 7, maybe even 10 years, but there's some opportunity to grow that business. What's really interesting about what you're going to buy is they have been through a pandemic. Like
Right.
they're going to be like a pandemic proof, quote unquote proof, business. So, I mean, you and I have kind of talked a little bit about that of just being like, you buying a business would be super fun. I think that's a really interesting tidbit that I guess is one of my bigger takeaways is, I think we're starting to see like what are these concepts? Like even if you just go look at the businesses that are out there today that are thriving, what are some of those other concepts that's going to be available to buy or purchase or partner with in a couple years from now?
Yeah. I think that it's only going to grow. So anyway, that's the first one. I'd say well, the gist of that one was sort of the accelerator model for buying businesses. I think that's really interesting.
Super interesting. Yeah, no. Hey, that's a great thought. I like
Cool.
that a lot.
All right, let's keep
All right,
let's keep
hey,
them rolling. Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna kick you off your soapbox here. So, um, so this shouldn't come as a surprise to you as to what I'm going to talk about because I've talked to you about this for
Right.
years now. I have had the biggest boner for this idea for a long time, and there are companies out there doing it, but I was just kind of like, I think it means so much to me just because it's like I am the dude who needs this extremely badly. So the general concept is employer paid student loan repayment. So it's kind of like an HR benefit, but for yeah. Kevin's smiling over here because he's like, oh, here we go again. um, uh, yeah, I mean, so this is something that's like really near and dear to my heart, and it's just, I mean, it is. It feels like I'm just drinking through a fire hose sometimes, and it's like,
Right.
man, I need some help. So, what I think would just be really interesting is if employers are able to help out with that. And there's actually like, I don't know if the right word is like bills or, there's legislation. Let me put it that way. There's legislation that currently allow employers to do some sort of match for student loan repayment. But I think there's an interesting, I don't know if you want to call it SaaS, play around that to where you can automatically like validate your employees and then automatically, put that payment from the employer onto the employee's account for them. I'm not sure how like pricing works, but I mean like doing like a standard like user by user model I think is
Right.
probably not a bad way to go about it. I think commissions get a little bit weird where you're taking X percentage like paid, but
So
that's kind of the overall concept.
yeah, and maybe I want to like ask a clarifying question. So would this be similar to how if you work at a company, they do like 401k matches? So maybe as an
Sure.
alternative, right, rather than doing a 401k match, they'll do a like student loan repayment match, right? For every dollar you put into repaying your
Right.
student loan, they'll match it either as like a benefit or a substitution or something. Would that be the idea?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I'm looking it up right now. I think they can match. They just ended up extending it too, just because I get emails about this stuff. Because I like to keep tabs on it. It says that,
Yeah.
so it's the CARES Act. It just got renewed all the way through 2025.
Oh, nice.
Employers can contribute up to $5,250 tax free
Interesting.
annually to each employee student loans. So $5,000 a year. I mean, that's a chunk of change. I mean, that's no joke, especially when with the accruing interest and
Right,
stuff.
that's just it, right? It
Yeah,
like
for sure.
compounds very nicely. So like I talk about this a little bit in my boot camp, and I just want to like mention it. Like what I love about what you're talking about and sort of the rationale as to why it's a good idea. When did that legislation come out? Do you know?
It came out a while ago, but it just got passed like end of the year or like very first of the year. It like got renewed. Let me put it
Renewed.
that
Got
way. It
it.
just got renewed. Yeah.
So one of the things that what makes this relevant is I say like good problems are things that are like mandatory, and that means like there's new legislation or there's laws that have been put in place that now require or enable sort of this new
Hmm.
frontier of stuff.
Sure.
And I've got other ideas that it sort of spawn off of this, but not to sort of go on a tangent. I think that this is a really good example of that, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
there's now a new moment in time where something that wasn't able to be done, we can now do it, and now we can start building technology to help make that happen. Because I
Yeah.
think it makes sense, right? On paper, it's like, dude, the student loans are crippling, and if you can pay those off quicker, right, it probably makes almost more sense to do that than maybe a
Yeah.
401k or something else. So,
For
are
sure.
there companies that are doing this currently?
Yeah, there's a few. Kind of the bigger one. It's called Gratify, GRADIFI. I think that's
Got it.
it. Gratify, and they were their own like startup, and then within like a year or a year and a half, they got bought by a bank. Which I
Oh,
thought was
that
an
makes sense.
interesting acquisition. I mean, I thought that was like pretty interesting of just being like, oh, this is a clear acquisition strategy of being like, if it's proven here once,
Yep.
it could probably be done again. But I know that I think there's three or four other companies that do this as well. And I noticed that another one got also purchased by another bank.
So,
So I think
yeah,
the biggest struggle, and like I don't know how this works. I mean, it's very partnership driven
for
because you have
sure.
to partner with the student loan companies to get access to like their system or APIs or whatever that is to go out and do that. Um, but I think that's kind of like the big takeaway
Yeah.
for me is it's just kind of like I'm drinking from a fire hose and I know that I'm not alone. I mean, this is a hot topic
Yeah, yeah.
um,
And
of
I'm
what's
just
going out there.
looking,
Yeah,
like I'm Googling it right now to see what exists.
sure.
Um, I'm not really finding any. I think I've seen them before because, like you said, we talked about this. But here's what I would
Yeah.
do. So, like, maybe if we're just to talk about this in like the context of like if you like this idea, what would next steps even look like? So I think this is a cool idea for sure because I think it solves a real problem. And honestly, this is one of those ideas that feels like you're sort of like the hero of the world, right? If you can eliminate the student debt
Yeah,
problem, like that's pretty
yeah.
dope.
I
Um,
mean, acquiring employees for this is like that's a no brainer because I mean
right.
everyone's like wanting this, right? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So I guess this is a good place, like right. So sometimes you either need to take when you're building a company like a bottoms up approach or top down approach, right? Bottom up being like the people who are the users who might not be the people paying for it. They love this thing. They tell their employers like, dude, you need to have this thing available. It's so obvious. It's like attractive. And then the employers adopt it because there's such demand from the bottom. Or you flip it and you go from like the purse strings, whoever holds them, at the company, and then sort of like get their buy-in, and then they buy it, and then they just sort of onboard all the users.
right.
I
I mean,
don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
you see companies all the time trying to come up with more creative like employee perks
Right.
or ways to like differentiate and to like win great talent.
Yeah.
Like you always hear about like when Google first started out and they had like slides and pool tables and ping pong tables and it was kind of like that's the culture and
Right.
like that got a lot of people to go and work there is because it like was fun and obviously like employees were getting a lot of value from it. So I think there's like from the not only like the employee side there's a lot of value, but aside from more on like the corporate side, like retaining that talent is a
Yep.
really interesting aspect,
That's true too.
as well as like acquiring talent from the
Yeah.
get go.
So I really like the top. I think you're right. I think the top down approach where you're using this as a differentiator or almost like a value proposition to getting new employees in makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I would also do, because like I wasn't able to find we'd said that there are probably other platforms that are helping companies like set this kind of
Yeah.
program up. I would look for like whatever the down market opportunity is there. My assumption is that So maybe here's something that I talk about a little bit is like if a company's raised money, they're sort of now on this path of they need $1 billion outcome, which means they're
Yeah,
gonna
you gotta
like
be a unicorn.
yeah, they're gonna abandon all these other potential opportunities that just don't align with like maximizing their growth or whatever that metric is that gets them to $1 billion. So there might be smaller opportunities that help like for instance, I don't know if this is true, but could be one, is that these companies' platforms like cost so much money that they're great for big enterprises that have like 500 plus employees, 1,000 plus employees,
Mm-hmm.
but it becomes unrealistic for a company that has maybe like 50 employees, right? But for them,
Sure.
getting the right talent actually is the most important thing, right? Because
And
they're
that
so
is
small.
significantly right.
Yeah, at that point, they can't be hiring like B level people. Like they need rock stars because they're going to be
Mm-hmm.
so integral to the success of the company.
Right.
But these other solutions may have priced them out of the market, right? Where it's like we can't spend 10 grand a year or 20 grand a year on this thing that just helps facilitate what maybe is a super like simple transaction. I don't know if this is true, but to me, then it's like, oh, well, let's just niche down and we'll build this for smaller, like Series A companies or companies that just raise a Series A,
Mm.
because like that that if they just raise some money, this is
They
sort of
probably got a little bit
contradictory.
to spend. Yeah, I know. I know what you mean, but there's
Right.
probably some sort of budget that's allocated for
Yep.
retaining and getting talent. So
And finding new hires and stuff like
it just
that.
comes
But
down to winning that money over the alternatives, right? Mm-hmm.
exactly. So I'm sure there's like a sweet spot to where you could service a company, you could make the price point
Yeah.
make sense, and it kind of depends on what you want to build, right? I totally think that this idea could be a $1 billion company because it's such a pervasive problem.
Yeah. And
But
I got I
you
got
know,
I got something else I kind of want to tag onto that too.
yeah,
So I didn't realize this, and this just comes to, I mean, like understanding student loans is hard for people. Like understanding like what are the terms and conditions as to like what all that means. And like one of the bigger overarching topics is like student loan forgiveness, just flat out by like the government, right?
yeah,
What I didn't know, so I refinanced, like I had all federal loans at one point, but my interest rates were just like crazy, like 11%, like out, like just mind-boggling high. So I refinanced for a lower rate, which would like make sense because it's like, well, I'm going to do this because it's going to save me
sure,
money. What that does is when people refinance their student loans, they unqualify themselves for any point for student loan forgiveness because it's not a federal loan anymore because it's now private money.
got it. Because they
So one other
repackage it, and yep, that makes
exactly.
sense.
So I think that's another thing to think about is like we hear a lot about student loan forgiveness. Well, there is going to still always be a large set of people out there who are just never going to get their student loans forgiven, just like me. Like
Right,
I just don't have that chance to ever have that happen. So one of the other ways that you could go about it is like a like Nerd Wallet. Like they have all this stuff on student loans, and they have like refinance through these 10 companies. So if I was to go out and start this, like that's probably where I would start. Is start with those companies that
right.
do refinancing, partner with them, and then go and see like who are these people that they are refinancing for and kind of go after those companies that way.
For
I think
sure.
a partnership strategy is really interesting rather than not rather than but maybe just a different avenue than trying to go bottoms up or top down.
Yeah, that is also interesting. It's like just get the people who. So would it be getting the private companies who are like
Yeah,
taking on the refinanced loans?
right. Well, for them it's a win for them because then they can say like we have an employee, like if you can talk your employer into refinancing, give me your money and like we'll go to bat for you to have like your employer help pay.
That's
So it's
interesting.
also an acquisition strategy for those refinancing companies. I think that's a really interesting win-win scenario to grow via partnership route that way.
Yeah, dude, I don't know. I like this idea a lot. I think that there's so many ways to
It's
slice
just
and
really
dice
hard to
it.
build. Right?
It is
It's
a
just
hard thing
really
to
hard to
build,
build.
right? It's getting that initial like traction to just sort of like get the flywheel churning. Not easy, but I do think that there's so many ways to start that like there's different angles that you could start with just to build what really could be a huge company. That's super interesting to me. So I really like that one. That's a good one.
Yeah. Let's move on though.
Okay, cool.
Do you have another one that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I'm sort of looking through the list and trying to. Okay, I've talked about this one a little bit.
List.
Um, this is a this is an idea I think is interesting, but it's like timing for it right now. I'm questioning. Okay, so right now I am a creator and I just produce a newsletter. We're doing a podcast now. We're sort of what I'm trying to do is sort of build out all of these different channels to attract people. I've heard this for a while, and I've just read articles on this, but it seems like SMS and like WhatsApp and these other
SMS like texting.
texting, yep, are
Okay.
sort of like, I don't know if you'd call them like the final frontier, but it's like an unexplored place that marketers are trying to play in, and for good reason, right? They've got like stupid open rates, like 98% of texts get read, right? Yeah, it's ridiculous. So like if you send texts, I mean, think about it. Do you have any unread texts in your phone right now?
So sometimes I get like weird texts from emails. So, but I mean, when I think about it, I still open them just because I'm like, this is super weird. What's going on? But I immediately delete them. But I guess
Right.
like, hey, it got my attention. I looked at it, but
Right. And I think there's a sort of like spammy way to do this where if you're just harvesting numbers and sending unsolicited texts, probably not the way to go. But so I've seen this with creators. I don't know if you've ever seen like big YouTubers do this, maybe Twitch streamers, but they'll be like, I hate to say this, but I think I saw it like on a Jake Paul thing, right?
here we go.
Right. I swear to God, like I'm not well, I don't even know what you call him, a Pauler.
Well, it's good talking to you today. Good
Right.
episode. Talk to you later.
No, this it's for research, I swear. So Jake Paul does this thing where he puts it in his bio, and it's like dumb, and it maybe works because his audience is like, I don't know, teenagers, but it's like text me on board, right? And just has his phone number, and it's for sure just a marketing play to get people's phone numbers so he can start texting to them, right? And he's not the
Oh
only
my
one that's
gosh.
yeah, he's not the only one that's done this. I've seen a few other people do this,
Yeah,
where
I've seen that too.
was just
Yeah.
like, hey, text me this thing. And it's just another marketing channel. So I think it is picking up steam, and it's a bit of like uncharted territory. So here's the idea. This is the context, but this is the actual idea. I think that there's an opportunity to create like the Substack for texting or SMS. And you could probably apply this to like just SMS or WhatsApp or Telegram, like all of these other like one-to-one typical messaging platforms. So either that means that you're doing it like you're creating a paywall, which is kind of like Substack's thing. You don't have to have a paywall on
Oh.
Substack, but like a paywall texting sort of service where we'll send you like a daily text, or just making the process easier, right? To be honest, I don't know what it looks like to sort of like manage mass texting at scale. There's like Twilio and other companies that sort of do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I was gonna say I did consulting for a startup. They were a healthcare startup, and we actually did like a mass SMS integration with or build out on Twilio, whatever you kind of want to call it. But that was extremely effective. So I
Right.
think this is really interesting where you're going with this. But I just know that like if we couldn't get a hold of someone, as soon as we're able to figure out like fit this demographic of people who do this thing, send them a text, like we were able to like there was a certain I don't want to give away kind of like I don't want to give away too
Sure.
many details as like what they did, but they like their problem was just getting people to show up to things, and it was like boom boom they're there, which was
Right.
really interesting because it got people to also take action. So I'm interested to hear like a little bit more about like when you say Substack, like are you thinking publication or distribution of content, or like who do you think would actually want to use something like this?
That's a really good question. If I think about who the early adopters are, um, it, I am actually just sort of riffing here. My assumption
Jake
is that
Paul,
it's
we'll put him down.
Jake Paul's an early adopter. It is interesting to look at people who are already doing this stuff, but like clearly, like don't reach out to Jake Paul. Like it would be a dumb idea. You're not gonna right. Like he probably is not going to be the person, or his team even right. But if I'm thinking about this, I think it depends on what you decide to build. So maybe I'll start there. So your question is like you say Substack. That's interesting. when I say Substack, I just think of like a turnkey solution for distributing text at scale. Maybe that's already been done. So maybe the interesting piece is like the paywall, right? We now allow you to like have people who subscribe, and we facilitate that sort of interaction. The person who wants that, I think, are two different people, which is why I think it matters, like on what sort of avenue you run down. For me, like I could potentially be an early adopter of this because I was sort of looking at it as like, this is an interesting experiment. I do think it's people who are already producing content. I think newsletter creators are an interesting one because they're already doing it in like a written form. I think people who are super engaged on Slack or not Slack, Twitter might be the best because what they're doing is they're not doing long form content. They're doing short form content and they're already producing it for followers, right? And this just feels like the next touch point. It's like, oh, you could literally just convert your text into tweets and send it to me via text. Even that's interesting, right? Like that could be, maybe it's not Substack for texting. Maybe it's tweet to text. There's certain people that I would love that, like just sort of getting a notification every time they tweet. Difference is that like, Twitter does this, right? You just get a notification. You can follow people, obviously. But I think it's like looking at this market as a new opportunity for creators and making it easier for them to put content on there and distribute it. That's like the core concept. I think there's a lot of like sub parts of this that you could just build out and start with. But that would be the work of you as an entrepreneur. It's like find out what the biggest problem is with doing something like this, and then just build that. Like build the MVP is like this one feature.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm listening to you. I'm also looking this other thing up. I swear I've seen this before for someone else big. I think it was Gary Vee. Doesn't Gary Vee do something?
I think I saw Gary Vee. Yeah, 100%.
I actually found it. Here it is. It's called WineText. WineText.com.
Yep.
What is this? I'm pulling up their website. Upcoming wine text deals. So that's what he's doing. Is he's instead of doing email marketing, he's texting people about. I'm guessing just about like, here's some cool wine. Want a coupon?
Yep.
I think it's interesting for an e-commerce play on that. As well as other than just kind of like the distribution of content. Because when I get that stuff in my email, I immediately like junk it or delete it.
And I think so. Let's talk about why this is hard. Right. Let's like flip the coin and like I've gotten all of the like, oh, I love this idea out of me, and now let's talk about why this probably couldn't work. Right. So that's number one. Is I think that there's still a cultural, at least in the U.S., right? In out of country, like I don't know how they feel, but for me in the U.S., I think that the SMS is like the one sacred place. Like I don't need you blowing up my text messages with stuff.
They always say as soon as marketers figure out how to ruin it, they will. And
right.
It's
Exactly.
It's only a time before. That's kind of how I'm thinking about this too. Is it's only a time before. Yeah. Go on.
So that's one thing, right? Is that like people probably don't want like promotional shit in their text, or they're sort of like text messages. The next thing is that like SMS isn't new, right? This has been around for 20 years now, maybe not quite that long, 15 years. If this was an obvious play, this like probably would have been done by now, right? Like I hate using that as an excuse because it feels kind of like a cop out. Like, well, somebody else would have done this. But for this one, for sure, right? It's like such a clear marketing channel that it hasn't worked in the past. So like, will it work now? I think what's interesting about timing is that the like creator economy has never been better. So there's more newsletters than there's ever been, and there's more people producing content that I think is interesting, that we might be seeing a shift in like an acceptance towards like opt-in text messaging to a person, which is maybe the last thing I'll bring up is like you need to figure out a way to make it super valuable, and for me to not want to be like, dude, get out of my phone. Like I don't need you blowing up my texts. So whatever you create needs to be like a high retention piece of content that doesn't get people to just dip.
Sure.
So for those reasons, I think it gets hard.
So, and again, I haven't put too much thought into this because we're just talking about it. I think what's a little interesting to me is like for the opt-in thing, especially around the content creation, is getting people to read your content's really hard. And the one thing that people carry around with them everywhere they go is their phone.
Right.
And on top of that, like let's just say like with your newsletter, for example, you send one edition a week. And if I want to keep some editions, I have to create a whole new folder inside of my email inbox or whatever that is, and then keep it. Or I have to have like a Notion page on all these blog articles to make sure that I keep them so I can reference them later. What's really interesting to me about the text message play is it's all in one spot there every single time. So
Right.
if I sign up for something and it's 10 editions, I can go back just by scrolling up to go look at those 10 editions. Like it's very low maintenance for me, or to make sure that I have everything right there, especially if I understand and find value in it. I think that's a really big pro for for me, even as a reader. But I think having a centralized location from a creator, I think there's a lot of value in that too.
Yeah.
I think the tricky part just comes down to the cadence, right? If I'm getting something every day, I mean, some things may warrant something like that, but I think that's going to be the really sticky, like for creators in terms of like making that decision of how often do I push these out. I think
Right.
there's a lot of other new territory decisions that have to be made, and I don't think they're easy decisions to make either.
Yeah. Well, and as you were saying that too, I don't, and maybe you would know because you've sort of worked with a company that did this. Is it is it really expensive to send text at scale?
I don't remember what pricing was, to be honest, but I do remember that it wasn't super easy to set up and to get and to
Sure.
kind of like get all that figured out. So from a like bootstrapping perspective, like was pretty difficult. Like it,
Yeah.
like engineers had to be involved, but maybe there's something like there's this big like no code movement that's going on, which I'm really passionate about. But I think like what's a easy bootstrap example of that that's just like underlying small functionality of setting up and sending mass texts for
Right.
creators. I think there's a lot of value in that of just like what's an easier solution than going through Twilio. I don't know if there's anything else out there though.
I don't either. And I guess maybe where I was going is like you might be right that just the setting up the infrastructure might be expensive if you want to do it like on your own. But and I might be totally off here. I just thought like sending a text message was expensive from regardless of the infrastructure, right? It was like 5 cents a message or something, or 10 cents a message. It doesn't scale as nicely as email. I don't know if that's true though. Um, I'm trying to look at the pricing on. Okay, I think I'm off. Programmable SMS starting at like 1/1000th of a penny. So
I'm looking at the same article you.
yeah, so I don't think I'm quite on with that. Yeah, and they do it for WhatsApp and things like that. So like, in I'm a huge fan of just using out of the box solutions, right? Like maybe you build on the back of Twilio and you just do one thing that Twilio doesn't, which is like the paywall piece or something.
Sure.
Like you don't need
You
to
build off of someone's
completely
product
right.
to offer your own thing. I mean, thousands and thousands of companies, like with Intercom, people build apps for Intercom all the time. I think it's kind of that same stretch along there where you build an app that's built on Twilio that
Right.
sells to its own customer base that aren't Twilio customers, maybe.
Yeah. So here's my last thought on this is that as we were talking about this, this is my last pro as like we are seeing a shift. I think that traditionally email marketing had been used for like e-commerce promotion. I mean, it was like email marketing. That's what it was. It was like, we're going to just sort of send you things that aren't necessarily like spammy or low value, but it was meant to sort of get you to buy more stuff. And now lately, we've seen a shift towards like email newsletters being more value driven than promotional, right? Where we're trying to get like transactional, we're trying to get you to buy stuff, right?
That's interesting. I mean, that's really interesting. Value-driven text messages, right?
Exactly. That's the shift, right? Because like I get text messages every once in a while from companies that are just like, hey, here's 15% off whatever. And maybe the evolution of how this all works, right? This is the thesis, is that you go from like pure promotion and it starts becoming more value driven as you realize that like we've tapped out people on the promotional stuff. It just pisses them off. But there is still a desire to get like good content that's worth reading in my sort of text message inbox. So
Yeah, there's a right
Yep.
way and wrong way to do this, and it'll be interesting to see the companies, like all the companies that adopt this and then do it wrong. I
Right.
mean, people are pretty private about their or who's showing up in their messages too. So I definitely see a lot of like pitchforks around this concept too of companies that do it incorrectly.
Yeah. Cool. We're at about 50 minutes.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. Do we want to cut it off here and then save the next ideas for the next one?
Yeah, I think that actually sounds like this is probably a really good stopping point. I mean, I liked all the ideas today too.
I did too. I thought they were good. Yeah. Next time you can do two, and I think the next thing I want to do too is I want to go a little bit more rapid fire, because I'd love to get through like 4 to 5. But
Interesting.
let's
Okay.
let's see. Well, I'll get some feedback, right? Like, let's see who the people who are listening to this, if they like the deeper analysis or if they're like, we get the gist of it. Next one. Let's just
Let's move on.
keep
Hmm.
rolling. But I love that. I think this was a really good first episode. And I like genuinely appreciate you hopping on with me and
Yeah,
BSing with
I'll
me.
send you an invoice. I'll send you an invoice.
Right. 50, well, 50 minutes. It's not an hour, so don't you dare try
I
to
have a
send me your
1 hour
hourly
minimum.
wage. Oh, all right. Well, you got me. Cool, man. Yeah, well, we'll wrap it up here.
Okay. Hey, good talking to you guys. Later.
Cool. Later.